When most people think of rail fanning, they picture other people filming and photographing trains, and while that is true, we also go out to see changes on the railroad. In the past 2 months or so, one of the most prevalent changes in Central Florida would be the scheduling of train M441, a Waycross to Tampa manifest that during the summer became a morning train on the S line, now switched to an afternoon run. In mid-September, my friend Dakota and I would be in search of one of these M441s, running south in golden light down the S-line with an EMD SD70 Mace leader. The train would catch us as we drove north at Lacucci, where a green signal and 3 minutes of setup time would be all we'd get before the train's arrival, speeding south after making a drop-off at Wildwood. Following 441 south of Lacucci wouldn't be an easy task, with Friday night traffic in full swing as the train overtook us once again at Dade City. It wouldn't be until Zephyr Hills when finally the roads cleared up, giving us a chance to leapfrog the train for a shot at nights, where the evening light would be perfect. And into Plant City we'd go with 441 right on our tails, meeting us with seconds to spare at Lake Wales Junction.
41 clear, Lake Wales Junction.
This would be our last shot of 441, as another southbound would be about an hour out, so back to the Diamond we'd go for better light. About 30 minutes after sunset, B631 would round the curve at Sandler Junction with 100 ethanol loads for Tampa. While not as enticing as other ethanol trains like this that usually have some sort of foreign power, this B631 left Chicago with a couple of Norfolk Southern motors and a Kansas City Southern in trail. But the power would be swapped in Corbin, Kentucky, ironically with a northbound ethanol train from Tampa with these two CSX locomotives. To make that swap happen, this southbound B631 would sit in Kentucky for 2.5 days, pushing its arrival to a bit after sundown this Friday night. So while no foreign power, it's still a train pounding the ever-familiar Diamond in downtown Plant City. With B631 out of the way, we'd grab some food nearby, returning about 30 minutes later to downtown with a high green lit at the north end of Cherry Siding for a southbound on the A-line. It would be for nightly intermodal I-045, running a bit early tonight, making it to Plant City at 9:52 p.m. I-045 would wrap up our night of Tampa trains around Plant City, but I'd be back out a couple weeks later after school one Monday afternoon in Valrico for another unit train this one being potash for Rockport Yard. These trains started running regularly around mid-April, and since then I've only seen one. So even though once again there'd be no foreign power to be found on this one, I'd make the drive out to Valrico for a shot of B243 heading south. As many of you probably already know, Valrico is the junction between the S-Line, which heads east by north to Plant City and beyond, and the aptly named Valrico Sub, which breaks off here, running southeast towards Welcome, Edison, and Mulberry, eventually ending in Fort Meade. Although not as busy as it was only a decade ago, Valrico is still known as the mainline gateway to the Bone Valley. This afternoon, however, a high green would be lit on the S-Line for B243, now only about 8 miles away from his terminal at Yeoman Yard. Although this train is marked as a Chicago to Tampa unit train, it's actually for Rockport Yard, about 2 miles south of Yeoman on the Tampa Terminal Sub. The train is to be transloaded onto ship and taken to a customer in the Caribbean, an operation that's only begun in the last 6 months. For today's crew, though, it's the end of a successful run down from Waycross to Tampa, where they'll tie the train down on the bypass track to wait on a local crew to take the train to Rockport. This school year has proven to be quite busy, not giving me much time to go out and film much, but once in a while an open night will pop up on the calendar, and some luck will provide a train or two. On yet another perfectly chilly evening this October, I drive out to the Brooksville Sub to catch L781's Tuesday run north up to Brooksville, today with the usual CM44s and a pretty hefty train of cement and scrap. This past October, we were treated to some very nice weather here in Central Florida, with temps maxing around the mid-70s, getting into the 50s in the evenings. The end of a grading period at school would bring a Monday off from school in mid-October, and with the weather being as nice as it was, I'd take the opportunity to head to the tracks, with our first action popping up about 10 seconds after parking the car. First stop would be Plant City, as a green signal would catch our eye for none other than M441, not running in the evening as he did a month ago, but as a sunrise train this morning, with the normal mix of hoppers, tanks, boxcars, reefers, coil cars, scrap guns, and auto racks. This train would be the first of a few today, but the longest by far, clocking the night's defect detector at a whopping 14,500 feet long, taking 6 minutes to pass us here at Plant City. With 441 clearing up, the morning lull in Plant City would return, so we'd continue east to Lakeland, where driving on US 92, I'd run into L780, a Tampa-based local working the County Line spur, where numerous customers are switched every weekday. Of interest on this train would be the Power CSX 2800, a Jeep 38-2 built in the 1970s, still working the railroad a half-century since its construction. I enjoy seeing these locomotives, not yet rebuilt, or not to be rebuilt at all. L780 would be switching County Line for the next hour or so once he cleared up, we'd continue to Lakeland, where we'd find another local, now only 5 miles east on the same portion of this ACL main line.
Quick ground point lined up, 2036, back him up. 2 will catch up, good for 12.
Catch up, line up again, keep it under 4.
This local would be L762, switching Sylvite Southeast, a chemical company that receives covered hoppers of Sylvite. 762 is based out of Winston every weekday morning, switching customers between Lakeland and Kathleen on the Vitus sub. It's 8:30 now, and he's completed his duties here at South Lakeland, now asking the dispatcher for a signal to proceed towards Kathleen.
Go ahead, 762.
Sir, good morning. We're on this number 2 track done with our work. When we can, we like to go north, pull by the connection there, and we need to shove back north on the Vitus side, work in between 10th Street and Kathleen probably for about 45 minutes.
The Ranger we right now, getting them out of the way.
All right.
That short conversation would be followed by this. That southbound that L762 was to wait on at South Lakeland would be calling KW Ford, the man in charge of the ongoing I-4 bridge construction just a couple miles north of us on that same Vitus sub.
Southbound, this is KW Ford on the Vitus sub. Message number is 13211. That's between the AR853.2, AR854.3. Men and equipment in the clear. Proceeded, authorized speed, please train over.
The train in question would be D628, a new symbol for me and this region as a whole. I knew the lighting would be better around the corner, so we jump over to Lakeland Junction where an approach medium would be lit for D628, our southbound freight. Because 628 is heading to Winston Yard, he'll be turning west at the junction using 4 switches to do so, mandating a medium speed aspect to warn the crew of the maneuvers lined ahead. In a couple minutes, D628 would round the corner, rolling south with 12,000 feet of Winston freight. This is actually the newly reinstated M603, southbound freight from Waycross to Winston, that has been abolished and added multiple times in the past few years. This would only be the 3rd or 4th M603 that would run after the addition back to the schedule. Leaving Waycross just after 8 p.m. the previous night, the train would switch Baldwin into the early morning hours of the next day, finally getting a crew change at Wildwood, where the train would switch symbols to D628.
Heading in around the north leg, along the unit.
D628 would slowly clear the junction and the switch at South Lakeland, giving L762 the freedom to make his moves. As advertised by the crew, they'd be reversing up to Kathleen where they switch Owens Corning near I-4. More goodies would be on this train, as the old chassis system shoving platform would lead the way north as the conductor and a trainee would man the end of the train. "40 minutes pass and we're now back at South Lakeland, where we catch L762 again, this time coming onto the freight lead to switch a couple of customers down the hill across from Winston. Knowing that Amtrak would soon be in the picture, not much else was to run this day, and hearing action in the Bone Valley near Mulberry, we decided to head south on this beautiful day into some of the most beautiful parts of our state. Our drive south would be interrupted by a check of Mulberry Yard, where trains L769, L770, and B360 would all be working together. First up would be 769, turning their lead motor on the Mulberry Y to clear up for B360, who also needed to spin their power before departing. This is one of the aspects of the Bone Valley that I love. 3 train crews using only 3 tracks to work together, all before heading their separate ways. Of those 3 trains, I decide to follow the L769 with his appealing SD40-3 leader. But first, B360 would have the Y to himself to turn his CM44 around. B360 is one of many phosphate trains that run down here, today originating out of Mulberry, with orders to pick up a train of phosphate loads out of Mosaic's Fort Meade mine south of Bartow. For now, L769 was of most interest, but we'd see more of this train before the end of the day.
L769, JF.
769, go ahead, over.
Yes, sir. We still got this CSXT 4040. If we can, we'd like to see you come out to the north into IMC, head through Edison towards New Wales. And if possible, can we get limits up to the 841, the SBC 841, so we can have some headroom?
Using the radio as our guide, I now knew that L769 would be heading to New Wales via the Valrico sub to Edison, so I'd set up around the corner at Nichols for him, where the lighting would be very good at this time in the morning. Setting up at the Loist in Nichols, often called the Limehouse by crews and dispatchers alike, L769 would be just minutes behind us with 34 cars in trail for New Wales. Although I was late to the party, starting to railfan this area around 2019, the Bone Valley used to be an all-EMD show, now completely taken over by GEs. So to get this SD40 leader down here would be a treat for the handful of railfans that were to be out this day.
10, 16, 23, SBC, 341, 16, 54, 34, LW. Local line 1A.
As you could probably hear, the dispatcher would be giving another train an EC1 as L769 passed, this one being B341, a phosphate shuttle of wet rock empties between New Wales and Ag Rock, south on the Brewster sub. You'd have to wait on L769 to back into New Wales, but once the exit was clear, he'd be departing south for Ag Rock. Knowing that B341 would have to pass here, I'd move south to Bradley Junction, where the Brewster sub and Aiken sub join at grade, with lines to Tram Yard to the east, Mulberry to the north, Ag Rock to the south, and New Wales to the west. We're pretty deep into the Bone Valley now, where you never know what you'll find. Just across the State Road 37 crossing on the Brewster sub at Bradley Junction is this curiosity, a siding track now used for storage called Tampa Long. The SE above Tampa Long means south end, with the north end only being about 1,500 feet to the west. What's odd about this short siding is the lack of mention on the timetable and its size, not capable of meeting most trains that run nowadays, normally over 3,000 feet long down here. However, I wouldn't doubt that back a couple decades ago, this was a pass track used once in a while, especially with the increased traffic of the time and much shorter trains. Here at South End Tampa Long, there's also a track greaser, as most trains are turning or about to turn 90 degrees on a sharp connection track similar to the one in Plant City. AEI detectors are also here, making for an interesting shot as B341 lugs his train into view behind a common consist of 2 6-axle GE wide cabs.
Switch at the South Y Bradley is in a normal
Another radio conversation between the JF dispatcher and that B360 would give me an idea on what we'd do next, as the train got authority to Fort Meade, an operation I've wanted to film for a while now. So one last shot of B341, now entering Agrock, where a loaded train would be waiting for him to take back to New Wales. Agrock is a common location heard frequently on the radio, as a couple pairs of trains serve the facility, transporting wet rock to processing plants like New Wales or ports on Tampa Bay. Agrock isn't a mine, but just a transfer yard between CSX and Mosaic, and its short railroad that runs down to the actual phosphate mine named Four Corners, a massive facility south of us in Hardy County. The Bone Valley is not only loved by rail fans for its interesting operation format or sense of old railroading, but simply the topography of the area. Cutting across to the east end of the BV, we'd use some more backcountry roads taking us through orange groves, forests, meadows, all untouched by the same gentrification that is quickly spreading to nearby areas. Coming into Bowling Green, I'd stop at the old ACL depot, beautifully renovated by the city. In the vacant grassy fields to the right of the depot used to be Bowling Green's sizable yard, serving trains heading to and from Arcadia and Fort Myers, a relatively busy route back in the early 1900s. An Atlantic Coastline caboose is also on display here, along with a station-mounted semaphore signal that probably saw its last days of railroad service 4 decades ago. Pushing north, now back on the Valrico sub, is Fort Meade, the southernmost town on this portion of the subdivision that's still in use today. The old ACL depot, built in 1914, still stands, now part of the Fort Meade Museum, which hosts an Alco RS-1 painted in ACL's classic black and yellow scheme, along with a couple passenger cars and another caboose. Up until 1971, Fort Meade was still served by passenger trains en route to either Lakeland or Fort Myers via ACL's ex-Florida Southern Bartow to Arcadia, Maine. Now the station only sees a handful of trains a week, like today's B360, rolling out of Fort Meade with a loaded train of wet rock for Ridgewood, led by 2 more GE motors. Chasing the train north on US 98, last stop would be a spot on the timetable known as Clear Springs, where B360 would be using every bit of the 35-mile-an-hour track speed. Would end our eventful day in Central Florida, and we'll end this video of about the past month or so of rail fame. I hope all of y'all enjoyed this one, and maybe learned a thing or two about the railroad and the areas that it operates in. And until we meet again somewhere out there trackside, this is Christian from Multicolor Films. End of transmission.